As a detective, I've always believed that the truth is just a matter of knowing where to look. My job demands that I read people, understand their movements, the flicker of emotions they try to hide, the slight shifts in their eyes when they tell a lie. I've done this for nearly 25 years, solving cases, catching criminals, and bringing the truth to light. But no matter how good you are at your job, it seems there's always one blind spot. For me, that blind spot was Amanda, my wife. We've been married for 10 years now, and during most of that time, I thought things were good. Comfortable even. Sure, there were the usual ups and downs that come with any marriage, especially with raising a son like Jake, who's now 8. But looking back, there were little things that I should have noticed sooner. Subtle changes that, at the time, I brushed off. But in my line of work, it's those little details that often lead to the bigger picture. You'd think I'd know better. Amanda was always calm, the steady one. She never made a fuss about anything, not even when my job kept me out late or called me away unexpectedly. I used to think that was one of the reasons our marriage worked so well. We were both good at giving each other space. We respected each other's worlds. But over the past year, something changed. At first, it was so small that I couldn't even put my finger on it. Amanda started going to bed earlier. She wasn't as talkative at dinner, but I figured she was just tired. Her job at the local school, where she worked as a guidance counselor, had its share of stress. She dealt with kids with tough home lives, and I figured that maybe that weighed on her more than she let on. Still, the changes were there. She wasn't as affectionate, and there was this distance that settled between us, like a fog that slowly rolls in, making everything hazy without you realizing it. I noticed it, of course, but I didn't confront it. Why would I? I trusted her. After a decade of marriage, you don't think twice about these things. You assume it'll pass. Besides, I had my own work keeping me occupied, and trust, well, it was the cornerstone of our relationship. Or so I thought. Then came the late nights. I'd come home from a long shift and find Amanda out, either working late or out with a friend. I never questioned her. I'd done the same myself, spent long hours solving cases, chasing leads. Who was I to judge? She'd come home a little after midnight, kiss me on the cheek, and head straight to bed. I told myself it was nothing. But those small changes started to stack up in the back of my mind. It was Jake who first planted the real seed of doubt. It was a Saturday about 3 months ago. I remember because it was a rare day off for me, and I was looking forward to spending time with my family. Amanda had gone out that morning to meet a friend, leaving Jake and me at home. After lunch, I suggested we go to the park, just the two of us. It was a perfect fall day, crisp air, and golden leaves falling from the trees. We hadn't been there long when Jake tugged on my sleeve, his little face scrunched up in confusion. "Dad, look, isn't that Mom?" I followed his gaze to a bench near the playground. There she was sitting on the far side, her back to us, and she wasn't alone. There was a man next to her, leaning in close. At first, I didn't react. My mind tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe it was just a colleague. Maybe she was catching up with an old friend. But something about their posture, about how close they sat, how she laughed softly at whatever he was saying, made my stomach twist in a way I hadn't felt before. I wanted to walk over, to confront her, but Jake was there, watching me closely. I didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to jump to conclusions without knowing all the facts. But in that moment, doubt settled in like a lead weight in my chest. "It's probably just a friend, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair, trying to sound nonchalant. "Let's head home, okay?" Jake didn't argue. He trusted me. I wish I could say I did the same. I didn't bring up the park incident again. I told myself it was just a misunderstanding. I wanted to believe Amanda's explanation, that the man was just someone from work. I wanted to believe it so badly. I practically forced myself to. But deep down, a part of me couldn't let it go. There was something about how quickly she answered, how easily she deflected the question. A woman I'd known for over a decade, and yet, suddenly, she felt like a stranger. Days passed, but the feeling wouldn't fade. If anything, it gnawed at me even more. I've always trusted my gut, and right now, my gut was screaming at me that something wasn't right. In my line of work, you learn that people are rarely as innocent as they seem. But this was different. This was Amanda, my wife, the mother of our son, the woman I had loved and shared my life with for 10 years. I couldn't just start doubting her without reason. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about that day in the park. I replayed it in my head over and over again, dissecting every moment. I tried to remember the details, the way she was sitting, the way the man leaned toward her, the way she laughed. The problem was, the more I thought about it, the less clear everything became. It was like a crime scene viewed through a fog lens. I hadn't gotten close enough to see their faces, hadn't heard what they were saying. Maybe they were just talking, maybe it was innocent. But why had Jake pointed her out? Why had she lied about meeting Megan when it was obviously a man? The questions kept swirling in my mind, and I knew I wouldn't find any peace until I got some answers. That night, as I lay in bed next to Amanda, I found myself listening to her breathing, waiting for her to fall asleep. It was something I'd done countless times over the years, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, I was studying her, as if she were a suspect in one of my cases. Was her breathing a little too even, her body a little too still? Was she pretending to sleep? I couldn't tell. My mind was spinning, and the more I tried to read her, the more I realized I didn't know what to believe anymore. Eventually, I drifted off, but it was a restless sleep, filled with dreams I couldn't quite remember in the morning. The next day, I went about my usual routine, but Amanda stayed on my mind. Every small thing she did, every smile, every word felt like a clue, something to be analyzed. Was her smile a little too forced? Did her eyes dart away when I mentioned Jake? I hated feeling this way, hated second-guessing everything she said and did. But I couldn't help it. Once doubt creeps into your mind, it festers, and it's almost impossible to root it out. As the days went by, I started to notice more things. Small things. Amanda had always been the organized one, never forgetting birthdays or appointments. But lately, she seemed distracted. She forgot to schedule Jake's dentist appointment. She spaced on a dinner we had planned with friends. And then there was the phone. She was on it more than usual. Not just texting, but locking the screen as soon as I walked into the room, sliding it into her pocket, or turning it face down on the table. These were small things, things that could easily be explained away. But when you're a detective, you learn that it's the small things that often matter most. It didn't help that Amanda had been working late more often. She always had an explanation. Some event at the school, a last-minute meeting with parents, or helping one of the kids she counseled. It all sounded reasonable, almost too reasonable. I didn't want to be suspicious, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I started keeping a mental list of these little things. Every time Amanda came home late, every time she left the room to take a call, every time her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, I noted it. It felt wrong, like I was betraying her by not trusting her. But what if she was the one betraying me? The breaking point came one evening when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Amanda had a habit of leaving her purse on the kitchen counter when she got home from work. She'd toss it there absent-mindedly as she went about her evening routine, cooking dinner, helping Jake with his homework, doing whatever needed to be done. But this time, she didn't. She brought it into the bedroom with her and closed the door. That wasn't like her. Amanda wasn't the type to be secretive. But lately she had been. The purse, the phone, the late nights. It was all starting to add up, piece by piece. That night, after she had gone to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at her purse on the chair by our bedroom door. I felt like a criminal even thinking about going through it. This was my wife. I shouldn't need to snoop through her things. But my gut told me I needed to know. I waited until her breathing was slow and steady, a sign that she had fallen asleep. Then, as quietly as I could, I crept into the room and grabbed her purse. My heart was pounding in my chest as I carried it back to the living room. What was I even expecting to find? Proof of an affair? A love letter? I didn't know, but I felt like I was on the verge of something. Something big. I sat down on the couch and opened the purse carefully, trying to keep everything exactly as it was. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I'd recognize it when I saw it. At first, everything seemed normal. Wallet, keys, a tube of lipstick, the usual things. But then, at the bottom of the bag, I found something that made my breath catch in my throat. A receipt from a jewelry store. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The date was from about a week ago, and the amount, $3,200. I stared at it, my mind racing. Why would Amanda be spending over $3,000 at a jewelry store? And why hadn't she mentioned it? Jewelry isn't something she would buy lightly. I hadn't seen any new pieces on her recently. No necklace, no bracelet, no ring that would explain such a large purchase. And then it hit me. If she wasn't wearing the jewelry herself, who was she buying it for? I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This was real. This was a piece of evidence, something tangible that I couldn't ignore. My mind scrambled for explanations, for reasons why she might have done this without telling me. A gift for her mother? Her sister? But Amanda didn't spend that kind of money without discussing it with me first. We always talked about big purchases. Always. I put the receipt back in the purse, exactly where I found it, and quietly returned it to the chair by the bedroom door. As I stood there, watching Amanda sleep peacefully, I realized that I was no longer just a husband. I was a detective on a case that I didn't want to solve, but one that was unfolding whether I liked it or not. In that moment, I made a decision. I needed more information. I couldn't confront Amanda until I had the whole picture, until I was sure. The last thing I wanted was to accuse her without solid evidence. But I knew, deep down, that I was getting closer to the truth, and the truth was going to hurt. The next few days passed in a blur. I kept replaying that receipt in my mind like a puzzle piece I couldn't fit into the bigger picture. Every time I looked at Amanda, a dozen questions came flooding in, questions I didn't want to ask her yet, not without being sure. I needed more proof. I needed to know for certain what was going on. But it wasn't just the receipt. It was the little things. Her distracted behavior, the quick glances at her phone, the slight hesitation when I asked about her day. I'd always prided myself on being able to read people, to sense when something was off. But with Amanda, it was different. She was my wife, and that made it harder. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that this was all some misunderstanding, that I was letting my imagination get the better of me. Still, my gut wouldn't let it go. I started digging deeper. Late one night, when Amanda was fast asleep, I grabbed my laptop and logged into our phone records again. I needed to see if there was anything else that stood out. Sure enough, there it was, the same number appearing again and again. And always at night. Sometimes she'd call him, sometimes he'd call her. Each conversation lasted at least half an hour, some even longer. There was no denying it anymore. This Michael Lawson guy was more than just a work contact. But I needed to be sure. I couldn't just accuse her based on phone records and a gut feeling. That's when I decided to start keeping track of her movements. Amanda had another late night coming up, and I knew it was my chance. I wasn't proud of it, but I knew how to tail someone. I'd done it for years as a detective, and now it seemed I had to use my skills on my own wife. That evening, she told me she had a school meeting that could run late. She kissed me goodbye, gave Jake a quick hug, and was out the door by 6:30. I waited a few minutes before grabbing my jacket and heading to my car. I didn't want to risk following her too closely, so I gave her some distance. My heart was pounding as I drove. This was it, the moment of truth. If I was wrong, I'd feel like a fool. But if I was right, well, I wasn't sure how I'd handle that. Amanda drove through town, not in the direction of the school, but toward the outskirts, where the more expensive restaurants and hotels were located. A knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't good. After about 20 minutes, her car pulled into the parking lot of a small, upscale hotel, the kind of place you'd go for privacy. My chest tightened. She parked, got out of the car, and checked her phone. She didn't look around, didn't seem to be expecting anyone to follow her. She walked straight inside. I stayed in the car for a few minutes, trying to process what I'd just seen. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the world. I wanted to confront her, to storm in and demand answers, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. Not without knowing exactly what she was doing in there. I got out of the car and made my way toward the lobby. The hotel was quiet, the kind of place where people came for discretion. No one paid attention to me as I stepped inside, keeping a low profile. The front desk clerk glanced at me briefly, then went back to his computer. I looked around, trying to figure out where Amanda had gone. Then I saw him, Michael Lawson. He was sitting in the hotel lounge, sipping a drink and staring at his phone. I recognized him from a photo I'd pulled up online earlier. He wasn't anything special, just a regular guy, mid-30s, clean-cut, wearing a crisp button-down shirt. The kind of guy you wouldn't think twice about if you passed him on the street. And yet, there he was, waiting for my wife. I stepped back into the shadows, my mind racing. Was she meeting him here? Were they together? The thought of it made my blood boil. But as I watched, something strange happened. Michael didn't head upstairs to meet Amanda. Instead, he left. He put his phone in his pocket, got up, and walked right out of the hotel without ever seeing her. Confused, I stayed put, watching him leave. Why would he come here and then just walk away? I was still trying to piece it together when something caught my eye. A man, tall and heavy-set, walked briskly through the lobby, heading toward the elevator. And behind him, Amanda. She wasn't alone, and it wasn't Michael Lawson she was meeting. My breath caught in my throat as I watched her follow this stranger, her face tense and focused, like she was on a mission. They didn't speak to each other, didn't even acknowledge one another as they walked. But something about the way they moved, the way they seemed to fall into step with one another, told me there was more to this. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to follow. But I couldn't just stand there. I waited until they disappeared into the elevator, then made my way to the front desk. "Can I help you, sir?" the clerk asked, looking up from his computer. I forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm supposed to meet a friend here. I'm not sure which room they're in. Could you look up Amanda Cardiff for me?" The clerk's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Sorry, we don't have anyone by that name staying here." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I knew Amanda wasn't staying here. This wasn't an overnight trip. But why the secrecy? Why had she met someone else when I was sure Michael was the one she was talking to? What was really going on here? I stepped back thinking I should leave. I'd seen enough. But just as I turned to go, a door behind the front desk opened, and a security guard emerged. He glanced at the clerk, then at me. And for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Something about the way he looked at me made my heart race. I pushed the door open and stepped outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap in the face. My mind was reeling. The man Amanda had met wasn't Michael. And Michael, whoever he was, wasn't even involved. He was just a cover, a distraction. But why? Why go to all this trouble? What was Amanda hiding? And then, in a moment of cold clarity, it hit me. Amanda wasn't just hiding an affair. She was hiding something much bigger. This wasn't about another man. This was about something else, something darker, something I hadn't been ready to see. I stood outside the hotel, my breath coming in shallow bursts as I tried to process everything. What had I just seen? Amanda wasn't meeting Michael Lawson. She was meeting someone else. Someone I didn't recognize. And the way she moved with him, so precise and deliberate, it was almost professional. This was no ordinary affair. I could feel it in my bones. I paced in the parking lot, trying to decide my next move. My instinct as a detective told me to march back in there, find out what room they were in, and confront her. But something held me back. I wasn't just dealing with a cheating wife anymore. This was something bigger, something that went far beyond a simple betrayal. And if I charged in now, without understanding the full picture, I might lose any chance of finding out what Amanda was really involved in. I took a deep breath, got in my car, and drove home. My mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. I needed more information before I could confront her. I needed to know who this man was and why she was meeting him in secret. I couldn't just rely on my gut anymore. I needed facts. Cold, hard facts. The next morning, I couldn't focus on anything else. I kept playing the events of the night before over and over in my head, trying to figure out what Amanda could be involved in. I thought back to the phone records, to the calls to Michael Lawson. Was he part of this somehow, or just a red herring? The man she had met at the hotel didn't look like Michael, but maybe they were connected in some way. Maybe there were more people involved than I initially thought. I decided to start with the basics. If Amanda was meeting someone in secret, I had to find out more about him. I didn't have a name, but I had his face burned into my memory. Tall, broad, bald, with a scar on his neck that was visible from a distance. That was something I could work with. Back at the station, I started running through the usual channels. I didn't want to raise any red flags, so I did my digging quietly, keeping it under the radar. I pulled up images from the hotel security cameras, hoping they had captured the man entering or leaving. It didn't take long before I found what I was looking for. Footage of him walking through the lobby just before Amanda arrived. I paused the video and leaned in closer. Something about him seemed familiar, like I had seen him before. But where? I ran the image through our internal facial recognition system, cross-referencing it with criminal records. If this guy had a history, I'd find it. It took a few minutes, but eventually a hit popped up. My stomach dropped as the name flashed on the screen: Eric Bauer. Eric Bauer was no stranger to the system. He'd been involved in various criminal activities over the years: drug smuggling, extortion, you name it. He wasn't a high-profile criminal, but he was connected to a number of underground networks. And now, apparently, he was connected to my wife. I sat back, staring at the screen in disbelief. Amanda involved with someone like Bauer? It didn't make sense. Amanda, the guidance counselor, the woman who spent her days helping kids get their lives on track, was now secretly meeting with a known criminal. What was she doing? What had she gotten herself into? For a moment, I considered the possibility that Amanda might have gotten caught up in something accidentally. Maybe she was in over her head, forced into this situation somehow. But no, the way she moved with him, the way she'd followed him into that hotel, it was too practiced, too calculated. She knew exactly what she was doing. I couldn't just sit on this anymore. I needed to confront her, but I had to do it carefully. If Amanda was involved in something illegal, I couldn't let her know I was onto her. Not yet. That evening, when she came home from work, I watched her closely, studying her every move. She smiled at Jake, helped him with his homework, and cooked dinner like everything was perfectly normal. But I saw through it now. I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she checked her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. There was something different in her eyes, too. Something darker, something distant. She was hiding more than just an affair. Over dinner, I made casual conversation, trying to feel her out. I didn't want to tip my hand too soon, but I also needed to see if she'd slip up. "How was work?" I asked, keeping my tone light, casual. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Same as always. A few tough cases, but nothing too bad. Any more late meetings this week?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "I've got one tomorrow night. Just the usual parent-teacher stuff." I nodded, pretending not to notice the hesitation. She was lying. I knew it. And now I knew that this wasn't just about sneaking around with another man. This was something bigger. After dinner, while Amanda was putting Jake to bed, I made an excuse to slip into our bedroom. I knew it was risky, but I needed more proof, something concrete to tie Amanda to whatever Bauer was involved in. I had a feeling that the jewelry store receipt wasn't the only clue she was hiding. I went to her closet and quickly scanned through her things. I didn't have much time. I checked her purse again, but there was nothing new there. Then I moved to her nightstand, opening the drawers as quietly as I could. Inside, I found the usual: magazines, hand cream, a couple of old birthday cards. And then I found it. Hidden underneath a stack of books was a second phone. My heart stopped. Amanda had a second phone, and she had never mentioned it. I picked it up, my hands trembling slightly as I turned it on. It wasn't password protected, which surprised me, but then again, maybe she didn't expect anyone to find it. The phone was mostly empty. No photos, no saved contacts. But when I checked the call log, I saw exactly what I had feared. Dozens of calls to Eric Bauer. The most recent one was from 2 days ago, the night she had gone to that hotel. I stood there, staring at the phone in disbelief. There was the proof I had been looking for. Amanda wasn't just cheating. She was working with Bauer. But what were they doing? What was she involved in? Suddenly, it hit me. The jewelry store receipt. The late nights. The secret meetings. They weren't having an affair. They were planning something. Something criminal. My hands were shaking as I put the phone back and closed the drawer. I had all the pieces now, but I still didn't know what the full picture looked like. I needed more. I needed to know exactly what Amanda was planning before I could confront her. Because if she was in this deep, I wasn't just dealing with a wife who had betrayed me. I was dealing with a woman who had become a stranger. A woman who might be capable of things I never imagined. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank screen of Amanda's second phone, trying to wrap my head around what I had just discovered. This was bigger than anything I could have imagined. Amanda, my wife, was connected to a man like Eric Bauer. She wasn't just sneaking around. She was hiding something darker, more dangerous. But what? I put the phone back exactly where I found it, my mind racing. I couldn't confront her yet, not with so many unanswered questions. I needed to know what she was involved in, what her endgame was. If I rushed into this without fully understanding the situation, I might spook her, and she could disappear before I got the truth. I went back to the living room, trying to act like nothing was wrong. Amanda joined me a few minutes later, and for a moment, as she sat down beside me, it felt like any other evening. We watched TV, made small talk about Jake's day at school, but I could feel the tension between us, like a wire stretched too thin. Every word she said felt like a lie. I was watching her closely now, reading her every move, every flicker of emotion. And what I saw only confirmed what I had suspected. Amanda was in over her head. But was she working with Bauer willingly, or was she being forced? That was the question that haunted me. I couldn't imagine her getting involved with someone like him by choice. But then again, I didn't know this version of Amanda. I didn't know who she had become, or what she was capable of. The next morning, after Amanda left for work, I made my decision. I needed to track her movements more closely, figure out where she was going, who she was meeting, and what her plan was. I had access to the resources of the department, but I knew I couldn't involve anyone else in this. Not yet. If Amanda was really involved with someone like Bauer, bringing in others might only complicate things, and I didn't want her to get wind of my investigation before I was ready. So, I went old school. I put a tracker on her car. It wasn't hard. I'd done it 100 times before in my line of work. Just another day in the life of a detective. Except this time, it wasn't a suspect I was following. It was my wife. As I set up the tracker, a wave of guilt washed over me. I hated what this had come to. I hated the fact that I was spying on the woman I had shared my life with for the past 10 years. But I didn't have a choice. I couldn't ignore the facts anymore. Amanda was hiding something, and I was going to find out what it was. The next few days were a waiting game. I tracked her movements through the GPS, watching as she went about her usual routine. Work, picking up Jake from school, errands around town. For a while, it was all normal, almost too normal. But then one evening, things took a turn. It was a Friday night. Amanda had told me she was going out with some colleagues after work. It wasn't unusual. She'd done it before, and I never had reason to question her. But now, every move she made felt like part of a bigger puzzle. I sat at home, watching the tracker, waiting for her to arrive at the restaurant where she said she was meeting her coworkers. But she never did. Instead, her car headed in a completely different direction, toward the outskirts of town, where the old industrial area was located. A knot formed in my stomach as I watched her drive into an area that I knew all too well. It was a part of town we'd investigated for drug trafficking and other illegal activity. I'd been there plenty of times on stakeouts, but I never expected my own wife to show up there. She parked in front of a warehouse, one that had been shut down for years, but was now known to be a front for all kinds of shady dealings. I waited, watching the little blinking dot on the map that represented her car. She didn't move. She stayed there for a long time, too long for this to be a simple stop. My pulse quickened as I debated my next move. Part of me wanted to drive over there and see for myself what was happening, but I knew that could blow everything. I needed to stay back and gather more information. So, I waited. When the dot finally moved again, it was well past midnight. Amanda drove straight home, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I knew that whatever she was doing out there, it wasn't something innocent, and it wasn't something she could easily explain away. The next day, I started looking into the warehouse. I couldn't do it through official channels without raising suspicion, so I went through my old contacts, people who owed me favors, people who had their ears to the ground. It didn't take long for me to get the scoop. The warehouse was being used as a meeting place for an underground operation. Illegal goods, smuggled in and out of the city without a trace. Everything from counterfeit electronics to untraceable weapons. And now it seemed Amanda was somehow tied to it. But why? What could she possibly have to do with something like this? I needed to confront her. I couldn't keep playing this game, watching her slip further and further into something dangerous. But I knew that if I didn't handle this carefully, I might lose any chance of getting the truth. That evening, I decided to test her. We were sitting at the dinner table, and I casually mentioned that I'd heard something interesting at work. I watched her closely as I spoke, trying to gauge her reaction. Apparently, the police are planning a big raid next week, I said, keeping my tone casual. Something to do with one of the warehouses out in the industrial district. I saw it immediately, the way her fork paused in midair, the way her eyes flicked up to meet mine for just a second too long. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. I knew I had hit a nerve. "Oh," she said, her voice steady but a little too controlled. I hadn't heard anything about that. "Yeah, it's a big operation," I continued, watching her closely. "Sounds like they're expecting to shut down some major players." She didn't say anything for a moment, just focused on her food. Then, she shrugged, forcing a smile. "Well, I hope they catch whoever they're after." I nodded, but inside, I was already planning my next move. She was hiding something big, and it was only a matter of time before I found out exactly what it was. That night, after Amanda went to bed, I checked her phone again. The second one. There were more messages from Eric Bauer, most of them cryptic, but one caught my eye. "Everything's set for next week. Just make sure you're there." I felt a chill run down my spine. Next week? Could it be connected to the raid? Was Amanda involved in whatever was going down at that warehouse? And if so, what was her role in all of this? The pieces were starting to fall into place, but I still didn't have the full picture. I knew I needed more than just suspicion. I needed solid evidence. Something that would confirm Amanda's involvement and tell me exactly what she was planning. And as much as I hated the thought, I knew what I had to do next. I had to follow her. Not just track her movements, but be there. Watch her in real time. See what she was doing with my own eyes. Because this wasn't just about Amanda anymore. This was about something bigger, something dangerous. And if I didn't act soon, I might lose more than just my marriage. I might lose everything. The next few days were some of the longest I'd ever lived. I was a man torn between two worlds. One where I was Amanda's husband, pretending our life was still intact, and another where I was a detective, creeping closer to unraveling the truth I didn't want to face. The two identities were in conflict, and I knew they couldn't coexist much longer. I couldn't keep playing the part of the trusting husband while the evidence piled up. I had no choice but to follow her. I needed to see her with my own eyes. No more speculating, no more guessing. I had to be there when it all came to light. The night came sooner than I expected. It was a Wednesday evening when Amanda told me she had yet another work meeting that might run late. By now, the routine felt rehearsed, each word a line from a script she had perfected. She kissed Jake goodnight, gave me a quick peck on the cheek, and headed out the door, as if she had no idea that I knew what she was really up to. I waited until she was gone, and then I followed her. The tracker on her car led me to the same industrial area where she'd gone before, back to that grim-looking warehouse on the outskirts of town. This time, I didn't just sit in my car watching a blinking dot on a screen. I parked down the street, far enough away to not be seen, but close enough to keep her in sight. I needed to know what she was doing in there. Amanda's car pulled up, and I watched as she stepped out, dressed in plain, dark clothes. She looked different, not like the woman I knew. There was no hesitation in her steps as she approached the warehouse door. No glancing around nervously like someone who was sneaking off to meet a lover. No, this was something else. A few minutes later, another car arrived, a black sedan with tinted windows. I recognized it immediately. It was Eric Bauer. He got out, towering over Amanda, and they exchanged a few quick words before disappearing into the warehouse together. My heart pounded in my chest as I crouched lower in the shadows, keeping out of sight. This wasn't just an affair. This was business. I had to know what they were planning. I couldn't sit back anymore and let this unfold without understanding the full scope of Amanda's involvement. I moved closer, careful to stay hidden as I made my way to the side of the building. There was a window, cracked slightly open, and I could hear their voices from inside. At first, I couldn't make out what they were saying, but then I caught fragments, words like shipment, cash, and distribution. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about sneaking around behind my back. Amanda was involved in something illegal, very illegal. And then I heard something that made the blood drain from my face. "I've taken care of it," Amanda's voice said. It was cold, calculated, like I had never heard her before. "The police have no idea. We'll move the goods next week, just like we planned." Eric grunted in response. "You sure no one's onto us?" Amanda laughed softly. "Of course not. Dan's clueless. He's too busy playing detective to even notice what's going on right under his nose." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Amanda had known. She had known that I was getting suspicious, that I'd been watching her. She had been playing me this whole time, feeding me just enough lies to keep me off her trail while she worked with Bauer. And I had let it happen. The betrayal hit me like a wave. It wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was deeper. Amanda had been lying to me for months, maybe longer, using my trust to hide her involvement in something dangerous, something criminal. And she had done it so seamlessly, so effortlessly, that I had barely noticed until it was too late. I couldn't move. I stood frozen by the window, the truth crashing down around me. This wasn't the woman I had married. This was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. And yet, she was my wife, the mother of my child. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. There was no going back now. I had to act. I pulled out my phone, texting my contact at the station. I couldn't take this on alone anymore. It was bigger than me, bigger than my marriage. I told them I had a tip on a major operation happening in the industrial area and that they needed to move in tonight. It wasn't long before I got a reply. The raid was a go. As I slipped away from the warehouse, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was relieved. The truth was out, and Amanda's web of lies would finally unravel. But another part of me was broken. I had spent 10 years with this woman, built a life with her, shared dreams, memories, a son, and now it was all gone. Everything I thought I knew about her was a lie. Within the hour, the police arrived. I stayed hidden, watching from the shadows as they moved in, guns drawn, ready to take down whatever operation was going on inside. I didn't need to be there for the arrest. I didn't want to see Amanda's face when they took her away. I couldn't bear it. The raid went off without a hitch. They found the goods, smuggled electronics, and counterfeit cash, just like I'd suspected. And they found Amanda, right there at the center of it all. Eric Bauer was arrested, along with a handful of other lowlifes who had been involved. And Amanda, she went quietly. No tears, no protests. I stood there in the darkness, watching her being led away in handcuffs, and I felt nothing. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by a criminal I didn't know. And as much as it hurt, I knew there was no going back. When I got home that night, the house felt empty. Jake was already asleep, and I sat in the living room, staring at the walls, trying to make sense of everything. The silence was deafening. The life I had built was gone, shattered by secrets and lies I never saw coming. The next morning, I had to explain to Jake why his mother wasn't coming home. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I kept it simple, told him there were things he couldn't understand yet, but that she wouldn't be with us for a while. He cried, of course. He didn't understand. And how could he? I barely understood it myself. In the end, Amanda's betrayal wasn't just about her affair with Bauer. It was about trust, about how someone you think you know can hide so much beneath the surface. And as a detective, I had missed it all. The signs were there, but I had been blinded by love, by routine, by the comfort of a life I thought was real. But now I was wide awake. The truth, as painful as it was, had finally come to light. In the weeks that followed, I tried to pick up the pieces. Amanda was charged, and I filed for divorce. I had to rebuild my life, focus on Jake, and figure out how to move forward. The pain of betrayal doesn't just fade overnight, but I had learned something important. Even the people you think you know best can keep the darkest secrets. And sometimes, the truth is more devastating than you could ever imagine.